All Catholic health and aged care providers know the importance of their core values. They're the things that drive us in our mission. We're not in the business of healthcare and we have an ethical component. We're in healthcare because of our values. That's what compels us. And it's extraordinary that there are so many different providers and they have such different histories. And yet all of the providers seem to come up with the same lists of core values. Values like excellence, care, compassion, justice, respect, hospitality. All of the providers basically have the same values, maybe in a slightly different configuration. And I think there are three really important points that I'd want to make about those values today. The first point I'd like to make is that our values, the lists of values that our providers have come up with, weren't dreamt up as a kind of a theory. It's not as though someone sat down and said, what sort of values should Catholic health and aged care providers be living? In fact, they're the result of reflection from the founding congregations, the sisters and brothers that established the ministries in the first place. At some point, each of those congregations sat down and considered, what is it that we're trying to do? What are the values that we're trying to embody in our ministry? So what we have in our core values are the real lived experience of providing Catholic health and aged care. This is the wisdom distilled from years of providing care. These are the things that the Church has recognised and that our patients recognise as being the heart of our ministry. So I think it's really important that each generation of Catholic healthcare providers, each generation of carers, takes time to listen to the story of the founders. For as long as those men and women are with us, I think we need to sit down and encourage them to tell their story, because that's our story. It not only grounds the ministry that we have, but it establishes a framework and a structure and a direction for our future ministry as we consider new ways of developing and growing what they have begun. Secondly, we shouldn't overlook how significant it is that all of these different congregations in their reflection have come up with the same values. We shouldn't be surprised by that. After all, regardless of how the ministries began or where they developed or in what direction they were taken, they all have grown out of and they all continue to exist in the same Catholic tradition. We all listen to the same master teaching us the parable of the Good Samaritan. We all take that as the icon of the care that we try to provide. And we all operate in the same landscape of the church environment, perhaps in different dioceses and different parishes, but with more or less the same structures. And whether we're aware of it or not, we're all trying to capture and to embody the dignity of the human person, to uphold that as our fundamental driving value. Back in 1965, the Second Vatican Council, in its pastoral constitution on the Church in the modern world, gave the Church a phenomenal reflection on what it means to be human. And so all of our health and aged care providers are driven by that vision. Now, I think we still have a lot of work to do to unpack the vision of the Council. There are 12 or 13 paragraphs of that document, but it will take us years to really delve into them, to tease them out, and then I think to link them into the values that we recognise as driving our ministries. But that broad teaching on the dignity of the human person has to be made more specific. It has to be articulated in ways that make it usable for us as we try to discern our mission. We've got to try and keep that mission as an equal partner with the business of healthcare. When that balance gets out of kilter, whether the mission dominates and the business suffers, we have no mission. If the business dominates and the mission suffers, we've got to ask why we're doing this. It's in order to keep those two in balance that we need to articulate that teaching of the Council on the human person. And the Catholic Health Australia's Code of Ethical Standards for Health and Aged Care Services in Australia is, I think, one of the best instruments that we have to articulate that vision and make it usable, principally in a clinical setting, but the broad vision underpinning the code gives us plenty of reflection to help us tease out, each of us in our own way, to tease out what are the important values for us. One of the reasons that the code is so invaluable for us is that it is also the fruit of long and deep reflection on the Catholic ethical tradition. It was put together by a group across the country, drawn together by the Bishops of Australia and by Catholic Health Australia. And over a number of years, they distilled from the wisdom of our tradition these principles, these directions that enable us to go forward with some confidence in the very difficult field of clinical care. Ethics is about making reasoned choices about right behaviour that express our core values. The decisions that we make have to be reasoned. They can't be just a visceral response. They can't be just a knee-jerk reaction. They can't be something that's purely intuitive. We have to be able to talk about why we're making a decision in this way, why we are taking these steps. In order to do that, we need a structure of thinking, a structure of logic behind us. Ethics provides that. It's also important to recognise that we're trying to do the right thing. We're trying to make good choices. So we need to know what we mean by what is right, what is good. We may not always be able to achieve the ideal, but that's a function of the limitation of the situation. We try to do the best that we can within the circumstances at this time. We might be quite limited, but we can do a lot of good, and sometimes we can achieve the ideal. The third part of ethics is it's about our core values. Our behaviours express the values that we hold. In a way, our behaviours are a window into the soul of our organisations. You can't know what's going on truly in Catholic health and aged care just by listening to the words that we say. You really need to look at the way we behave, the way we run our ministries, the way we treat people. Our actions truly do speak louder than words. The point I want to emphasise is that ethics is more than a theoretical structure, and it's more than a compliance issue. It's a very pastoral discipline. It is, after all, about our attempts to do the best that we can for this person in this situation. Providing the best medical or aged care that we can is our way of providing the most holistic care for the whole person that we can. And that, after all, is one of the hallmarks of the Catholic health and aged care provider. That becomes very clear when we dig into the Code of Ethical Standards. That's really our reflection on how we live the ministry of Jesus today, how we translate his ministry and bring it into the lives of people today, the situations of today, using the technology of today in the political and the financial environment that we have to work in today. The Code of Ethical Standards keeps the mission very much at the forefront of our minds. The Code allows us to reflect on the place of healthcare within the wider mission of the Church, which is the environment in which we all operate. It helps us to think about how we bring justice and how we are able to collaborate in the ministry of health and aged care. It enables us to reflect on the significant moments of people's lives that we're dealing with as we provide care, particularly the experience of illness, of suffering and of death. All of those things we understand from our Catholic perspective. The Code enables us to engage people at those moments and to provide them with a sense of hope and of confidence. The Code offers detailed guidance on many of the specific clinical situations that we encounter, where it can be difficult for us to know exactly how to capture our values and to live them out. There are three key points that we need to touch in any difficult ethical situation. First of all, we need to know exactly what's going on, to gather the facts as best we can, and often that's a difficult clinical task. Secondly, we need to be conscious of the values that are at stake in this situation, the values of the human person that we're especially going to try to preserve and to protect. Thirdly, we need to have good avenues of communication between all of the stakeholders in the decision, the patient or the resident, the medical personnel, the nursing or ancillary personnel, and so on. The code addresses all three of these areas in respect of very difficult clinical situations, particularly some which are most ethically problematic. Understanding the human and Christian values that underpin the code enable us to tie our values into the often difficult terrain of our organisational, operational and clinical decision making. The code connects us again with that fundamental driver of Catholic health and aged care. As St. Paul says, it is Christ's love that drives us on. The code tries to capture what that means in practice for Catholic health and aged care in its operational and in its clinical work today.